Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name's Dale Maxwell, and I am doing this investigation thing into all things kick-assery, right? And we've been doing this chat series for about 2 weeks, and it's been amazing. It's been so cool. Last week, I had the opportunity to talk to an old mentor of mine and catch up with her, and that absolutely just filled my cup. This week, we have a huge lineup. I have a chat every day this week. Starting the week off, I'm super stoked. I get to hang out with this dude. I've got my cameras backwards. This dude, John Logan. We chatted a couple weeks ago now, and I threw out this thing. Guess we have what movie coming out this week, right? Huge. The Star Wars coming out this week, and John is a mega geek when it comes to everything that has to do with anything in that realm. So I was like, why not? Let's sit down, let's BS, let's talk a little bit about it. Now I'm gonna say this right now, and I'm even gonna put it up on the screen. When it comes to this movie coming out, I have seen one preview. So no spoilers. John, you and anyone else on here, no spoilers. All right. I know it's gonna be hard, but anyway. John, okay, real quick, man. I kind of talked about what do you do, dude? How are you the dude?
This leans way more towards my creative side, right? This is not the day job. This is not the grind. This is not the opportunity I have at the Lamb County Historical Society and Museum. That's my day job. I'm very passionate about it. Like we talked for 45 minutes about that. So this leans into the other half. This leans way more to my creative side. I've always been a fan of this franchise. And part of that is because these movies weren't old when I first enjoyed them, right? Like you and I have that unique experience of seeing Star Wars when it was fresh for everybody else as well, with episodes 4, 5, and 6. So there's no escaping that for you and me. Everybody knows it. There's no disconnect. We know it better than future generations have come to learn it, just casually. Like we didn't have a choice. It was everywhere because of its instant status as for what it was and what it did and the boundaries it pushed and how cool the story was. It's just everything a kid could want in a package that came out, the same year I was born, as far as the last movie, Return of the Jedi was in 82. So I wasn't that old by the time I watched those, and neither were those movies. So this has always been a huge thing for me. I'm really excited to get into this. And again, the spoiler thing is really tricky because I really want to talk about The Last Jedi, but at the same time, I've only watched one trailer and I've only watched it once. So it's like, I just want to go. I'm planning on going Thursday night. What about you? Are you going to go Thursday?
It's so funny you say that. So, yes, I'm going Thursday night, and my wife actually bought it as a gift because there's a lot going on in our life right now. And I'm like, you know what? It's 10, $15 because of course I want to go watch it in the comfy seats and I want to go watch it in the 3D and all that jazz. Right. So I'm like, you know what? Yeah, it's maybe 15, $20 after I buy a soda. I'll just hold off. I'll be that guy, I'll help out. And my wife said, yeah, no, because you're going to be mopey and you're going to be bitchy and you're going to, no, you're just going to go do it, get it over with. And right. So speaking of the trailers, we went, my wife and I went and watched Thor Ragnarok. I think it was. And so of course they had a Star Wars trailer during that time. And I'm like, crap, what do I do? My wife took my hat, covered my eyes, and I covered my ears during the trailer. Okay. That's how ridiculous it was. But I was like, no, I'm okay. She's like, no, you are covering your face because all you're going to do is bitch about it for the next 2 days if you see this trailer. So, yeah, it's so funny, John. There's a lot of movies that I don't care. I'll watch the trailers. But if it's a movie I'm really interested in, I don't want to see the trailer because unfortunately over the last 20 years, our blockbuster movies, there's a tendency that if it's being advertised as this month's this quarter's blockbuster, they're going to tend to put a lot of the top pieces in the trailer to get you to come out.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no thanks.
I agree.
So, but anyway, with all that said, so here's the thing, man. You know, you're talking about when we were growing up and when Star Wars came out. You know, I remember when it came out on VHS, and my mom actually told me this story again just the other day. So it came out on VHS. We, of course, went straight down to the it was not even a Blockbuster in the little town. It was over in Darby, Montana. And so we went down, we rented it, watched it that night, watched it the next morning, watched it after we watched it, and then we watched it again. My cousin and I. Well, unfortunately, we also had my grandfather's funeral that afternoon, right? And my mom to this day still says, she's like, all we could hear was you guys giving us a blow-by-blow exact content of that movie. She's like, she had never watched the movie, but she knew exactly what happened in the movie because my cousin and I were telling her every single thing that happened during the movie. And it's so funny because the technology, if you retrospectively, if you look at the technology, it sucked. You know, what they were using and the budget that they had. But the way they told the story and the way they owned it was stupendous.
Yeah, it really did set a bar for what was to come in a very and you can look at certain intellectual properties, certain franchises, and they have set a bar. And that's what Star Wars did right out of the gate. And nobody expected it. Again, they were way low budget compared to, I mean, there were musicals with bigger budgets than Star Wars. I mean, by a large margin, there were these epic productions going on. It wasn't like Hollywood hadn't figured out how to make money yet. But that team, that original Star Wars creative group, didn't have a lot to work with. Mm-hmm. And they knew that, and they worked around it beautifully to tell a story that became iconic. And there's other ones that didn't quite get there on around the same sort of problems. So that's always been something to admire about that original trilogy, is the way they did work around the budget, especially in episode 4. As you know, after episode 4, whatever, they would have given George Lucas whatever he wanted to continue. And you can tell that by looking at, you know, episode 5 and episode 6, how much bigger and grander, and even the effects that Star Wars then pushed itself to try to create this universe. And it's really, really awe-inspiring from a creator's standpoint that, you know what, you could be, I mean, you shared it this morning as a preview for this talk. You know, George Lucas, you know, sold that movie door to door, and it wasn't an easy road to hoe. And that's pretty impressive. There are other stories like that, and I always root for those stories. Always root for those stories because they're inspiring. So yeah, that's one of the things that draws you in later, you know, after the shine is worn off and you're like, yeah, I've seen Star Wars 1,000 times. Me as a kid, we lived 10 miles we lived 10 miles out of town. So we didn't have great TV reception. We bought the one of the original VHS trilogies. My mom and dad went all out on, bought all 3 of them in a very cool production box. You know, it was awesome. We still have it because it's just a cool collector's item. And man, we played those tapes until I had memorized the opening monologue to each film before it scrolled by, right? I could just read it. I could narrate the opening monologue for episodes 4, 5, and 6. That's how many times my family sat through those movies for me. So
not again. You know, it's interesting because you want to talk about a story. You know, Star Wars was not a book that they made into a movie. It was not a series that they made into a movie. It was an original story that the book came after. You know, the book was written by an author that, you know, from what I remember, basically they were needing to basically continue the series on, and they wanted to continue the legacy because, you know, Lucas had big plans for episodes 1, 2, and 3. He just didn't have the technology and the access to that to do it the other way around. And so with that, you know, he's like, okay, so I don't even remember the author's name off the top of my head, but they reached out and said, hey, we need you to write a book. And the guy was like, what's the premise? What's the background? What other stories are there? There's these movies. Go. You know, and I guess the process was so backwards than what usually Hollywood and everyone does. You know, he had to come up with it, and he had to correlate with Lucas the entire time. And I guess it was the first book was really hard because there was no premise. There was no one that done it before that.
Right.
And so I've always found that interesting is, you know, you have so many of these amazing movies, whether it's sci-fi or not, that originated from a set of stories or a book or something else. And, you know, one that pops into my head that is somewhat similar to that is the He-Man series, the cartoon series. You know, usually you have a cartoon series and then you make the toys from the cartoon series. Mattel did it backwards. They had already made the toys, and then they wanted to do a cartoon series to support and promote the toys. So it was one of the first times that they did that.
Yeah, and Star Wars helped out with that. It was all in that time frame where intellectual properties were becoming a brand all of themselves. If you go back and you think of the original animated Lord of the Rings series that was previous in the early 70s, right? You had The Hobbit and you had the Lord of the Rings, and they were animated and they're beautiful and they're gorgeous and they're worth watching. There were no Lord of the Rings toys growing up. Like, you couldn't go buy a Gandalf action figure. It wasn't understood yet that you could brand your intellectual property as its own brand and put it everywhere. And they did. You had Star Wars lunchboxes. You had Star Wars first edition toys, second edition toys, third edition toys. It went crazy. You had Star Wars comic books that came out right after the movie, right after people started making money. Everybody, for the first time, really jumped on board and said, how can we make money off of this? And what is the process to collaborate with that creator and get their permission legally to be able to push this brand in 1,000 different directions? And Star Wars really helped establish that. And now you can't get away from it. Now every single intellectual property throws themselves into every market.
Yep.
And sometimes that's a huge failure, and they overextend themselves, and there's bad business decisions being made because this standard, you know, and it's like, well, that didn't quite work out. But Star Wars was one of those ones that did. And again, it's one of those ways that it set a precedent for the way we understand media and how it surrounds us completely.
And going down that road, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this an urban legend or is this legit that Han Solo's character was actually supposed to be killed off early, but they kept him around because his merchandise sold so well that Mattel and everyone else said, no, we need to keep this character, so he was written back in? I
don't know. That is an urban legend I've never heard. The only thing that ever gets discussed about Han Solo is did he or did he not shoot first? In Mos Eisley, did Han Solo
Frito
kill that little green space smuggler in cold blood, or was it self-defense? And that, to me, is really interesting from a story standpoint because it affects the way we categorize and connect with that entire character. And again, with its popularity and the re-releases of director cuts and definitive editions and platinum editions and all the thousands of different ways, you know, VHS and Betamax and DVD and Blu-ray, extended cuts, all of these different viewing options for Star Wars, there's one where it's very obvious Han killed Guido and just in cold blood, just shot him, knew what was coming, you know. And then there's a post edited that people are like, hey, this is a kid's show, you know, it's on my kid's lunchbox, he's got a Han Solo thermos, and I don't want him, you know, that dude's a killer, that guy's not a good character, could you do something about that? And so they did. They went in and they edited the film where Guido pulls his blaster, shoots at Han, he misses, and Han returns fire in self-defense. The way we understand that character changes significantly on that first impression.
Yes.
And I am a bigger fan of Han shot first. It deepens the character. Mm-hmm. It makes his later choices more impactful if at the beginning he is introduced as somebody who has no problem blasting a thief in a bar. It's one of those choices in story that I wish the debate had never happened. I wish that we all knew that Han Solo really not quite as good a guy, lovable, roguish. Geez, I'm back to save the day in my really fast starship, guys. Like, I love Han Solo. He's one of the first anti-heroes that we really get to see, but the anti part is dependent of the Mos Eisley Cantina scene of him killing Guido without any pause. Just bam, you're dead. You're messing with me, you're dead. And as Han Solo goes on, it's interesting to me.
Well, absolutely, because you got to think the backstory, right? Is he's a smuggler by trade. He works with the worst of the worst. I mean, he owes. Who does he owe? The number one smuggler, or not the smuggler, but the crime boss. You know, the Hutts. He works. He's in with the Hutts in not a good way. I mean, he owes them, and that's not where you want to be. And so if Guido, no, gosh, the green guy's name. Anyway, can't think of his name off the top of my head. Anyway, you know, while he's there, he's like, okay, shit just got real, and they're now sending bounty hunters after me. So I got to get out of here, and I got to go do my business. I don't have a problem with him shooting first, but you're absolutely right, is that it really establishes that he comes from a background of no bueno, right? And yet, as his character grows, as the character development grows, then you see the internal conflict. And if you read anything, if you've read any of the series about Han and just the conflict that is internal between him and his Carillion roots and his background, and he's just a rogue. He wants to do his own thing, but then also he's got this huge piece of him that wants to make a difference, and he wants to take care of his people, and he wants to make a positive difference. And so that's part of the internal conflict that I love about that character.
Yeah, and I agree. And it deepens the storytelling. And that is it's the story that has made this last. It's because especially with the original 3, and you could argue episodes 1, 2, and 3 as well, the special effects don't matter as far as staying power goes. And that's true generally in any movie. If the story is there, we will either appreciate the effects that were used to tell that story, or we will ignore them completely and enjoy the story anyway. Mm-hmm. And that's just talking to you as a movie person, right? Like, that's just how it works. In the long run, special effects don't actually matter.
You're absolutely right. They enhance, and there are a lot of examples of huge budget movies that flopped, you know, and either they flopped in the box office because it was bad timing, it was blah 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 blah, who knows, and they thus became a cult classic. The one that pops in my head is Waterworld. It was a box office flop, but I personally love that movie. you know.
I was going to say the same thing. I was going to be Waterworld, right? Exactly the same movie we were thinking about there. I mean, they burned down a complete set. It sunk to the bottom of the bay. They had to start over, right? Like, it was a disaster. And when you compare it to its standard of Mad Max and Mel Gibson running around the Australian desert, you're like, they put a lot of extra money into trying to reach that standard. So I was just as happy with dudes on motorbikes as I am dudes on jet skis. Like,
right.
It's really an interesting idea there. And yeah, Waterworld failed so miserably.
But then you take down that same path. Then you look at Postman. Okay, they're both the same. A lot of the same actors, a lot of the same story. But then you look at Postman. Postman was a very low budget, low tech movie, and it succeeded box office and critically way better than Waterworld. So you're absolutely right. But the thing, yes, story has an immense amount to do with it, but we also have to admit that there's a timing issue. There's a marketing issue. There's a lot more to it. You know, what's going on in the world at that time. There was a movie that came out, man, I can't think of it, a couple, 3 years ago, and the topic of the movie, oh, this is going to bug me now. The topic of the movie was benign when they shot the movie. When they wrote it, they shot it, they post-produced it, everything. It was benign. But then when it was getting ready to hit the theaters, something in the world happened that dramatically affected, and now that topic was no longer benign. It was a hot topic, and it didn't work out very well, and they lost their asses on it. And that's something that's always intrigued me, is how production companies time a lot of their rollouts, you know?
Right. So let me ask you this, on that idea of timing matters, release dates matters. Is the Star Wars franchise too big to fail? Does it matter? I mean, Star Wars could come out 4:00 in the morning on a work day, and I would be standing in line, right? Like, is Star Wars too big to fail? And is that a hindrance in the franchise, or is it like, okay, we can get all the resources we would ever want to do this, and we can push back release dates time and time again and delay our movie, and that's happened. Which way does that go there for you, looking at this franchise?
Okay, so we now have a franchise that is, what, 40 years old now-ish?
Almost, yeah.
Okay, so we have a franchise that's 40 years old that even we're not going to go down the debate of whether or not episode 1, 2, and 3 were worth the franchise or not. They still made a gajillion $1,000s, right? So I kind of look at your question the other way. Is it too big to fail based on, careful, try not to breathe and swallow at the same time. So is it too big to fail based on production time and all that stuff? No, I agree with you. You know, big movies usually pick sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas or 4th of July. Those are like the biggest. That's where everybody's jockeying, right? And of course, Independence Day really solidified the whole 4th of July rollout time.
I think we're connected.
It's thick. It's just thick. So, but with all that said, though, I think it's the opposite is the issue, is that it's such a freaking enormous franchise, is that the opportunity to fail from not doing it right is a bigger option. And I think episode 1 is the good.
That's the correct answer, by the way. Good job. You get
What's
an A.
that
That's you get an A. That's the correct answer. Good job. You passed. Because I agree. And you don't want to harp on it, because again, it's one of those discussions that has been had 100 times, is what was the matter with episodes 1, 2, and 3? Why didn't we get that cushy instant classic that 4, 5, and 6 were? Well, in my opinion, it all comes back to the storytelling. Again, they had their bajillion dollars, and they had the best special effects in existence at the time, and they're still way up there. You are still just mind blown. I just watched Revenge of the Sith 2 nights ago with my boys because I wanted to watch Order 66 go down and figure out the timeline of Order 66 because it's one of the coolest little bits of storytelling currently being investigated, I think, is Order 66. I'm really intrigued by that. I want to know exactly where every Jedi was. I want to know exactly who survived. I want to know exactly what happened to the clones that we became attached to in the different parts of the franchise. You know, why was Commander Cody so eager to shoot Obi-Wan in the back? You know, but Rex wasn't. Rex didn't kill Ahsoka on Mandalore. Like, why? What was the difference between those two clones when we got to watch both in the Clone Wars series develop as fully realized characters? Like, I need more information there. So me and my boys just sat down and watched episode 3. And again, was it the storytelling that they got lazy on there because the franchise was too big to fail? It's interesting to me.
So two things, and I want to go off on another tangent here for a minute as well. But I think Lucas waited for so long for the technology to catch up to what he wanted to do that was the focus. Because if you look at, and that was what was being hyped. You know, that was, man, Lucas has waited this long to do these first 3 episodes, and because the technology's here and we're going to blow you out of the water, and technology, CGI, blah, 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 right? And that was the hype. That was the push. And like you said, it wasn't, here's Princess Leia and the fate of the universe. And that, to my memory, when that came out in what, 01?
Yep.
Right? 01? I don't remember them talking about the story that much. Now, granted, we've had books and we've had, all this stuff coming this way. So it wasn't a fresh story. We didn't know anything about it. And so the expectations were high. But back to your Order 66, and my quick answer is I believe a lot of the clones, because they had a fail-safe switch. They had a genetic switch that when it was flipped, they had to do what they were told to do. I believe throughout the war and their experiences, a lot of those clones became individuals. They were no longer clones anymore. And so I believe that they were able to challenge that genetic switch because of their experiences. That's just my little
right.
piece.
And I would agree.
Okay, so back to your Order 66, though, is that there's been an issue in my mind, and you're a hell of a lot smarter than I am, so help me with this. The Jedi Order is all about balance in the Force. And from the beginning of the series, the beginning of the franchise, Yoda is talking about the balance. The balance. Okay, to my rudimentary brain, that means that we have equal amounts of this and equal amounts of this, and they balance each other out. So was it ignorance? Was it arrogance? What was it that told the Jedi Order that eliminating the Sith, and you can read the books, you can go off the TV or the movies, whatever, but eliminating the dark side of the Force creates balance. And why is it that they, throughout this entire episodes 1, 2, 3, the Clone Wars, everything else, that they felt that, and Yoda, being as freaking smart as he was, saying that it's okay for us to eliminate one half the equation and calling this balance. And for them being so surprised when they get their asses handed to them because the Force is recreating that equilibrium, that balance. Go.
Yeah, it is the largest loophole in the balance of the Force theory. Is how did nobody on the Jedi Council understand what balance means and you see this theory explored much more outside of the mainstream movies. You get references to the gray Jedi who don't believe in the Force being anything but a tool, and it is the user that decides, which is very different than the dark side or the light side of the Force. Please, red pill or blue pill, which one would you like? It's completely different. They're like, no, the Force is everywhere. It's in everything. And we just use it to do what we want to do. So yeah, that's the largest loophole. And I agree. How did they misinterpret this prophecy of Anakin bringing balance to the Force when Sith had been unnoticed for 1,000 years, right? No Sith, the Jedi Order's won. It's been all light side Force users for 1,000 years, and we're still hoping for balance. How does that equate to anything except the Sith reappearing and putting the galaxy back into chaos? So, and did Anakin, was him bringing balance to the Force, fathering Luke and Leia, so then Luke could go on his character arc and balance it back out? Was it the fact that Anakin was one of the few Force users, however not the only one, to switch sides of the Force? Does that count as being balanced, where he started as a Jedi, went to the dark side, and by the end of his arc returned to the light side and dumped Emperor Palpatine down a well? How does that actually work out in fulfilling this prophecy? And I agree, it's an interesting loophole that they haven't addressed in the movies well. But again, if you go exploring, if you read the books, if you look at the comics, if you look at the other areas, you kind of get more informed about that.
And the thing that I really love that this particular question resonates in a lot of the book series that subsequently came after. The series that I really, really enjoy is the Thrawn Legacy and the Xandi epidemic, and how Han and Leia's kids, I believe it was Jaden, went and actually started studying the neutral side of the Force. And the other thing that I love is in the Rebels, the cartoon series, the Rebels, it is that there is a neutral Force user that is on that one planet. And so they're bringing that into the mainstream part of the Star Wars legacy, is that there are entities that are Force users that don't adhere to the bad versus good. And that was, I really loved seeing that. I'm like, okay, now we're creating a lot more context. We're creating a lot more into this, because there's got to be more than good versus evil.
Yeah. And that's one of the coolest things about a franchise this large and this well established. And kudos to the creators for giving us a world right off the get-go that we wanted to go and explore on our own as fellow creators. Like, if I could sit down and write a Star Wars book, yeah, sign me up. I'm all for that. You want me to sit down and write comic books about Han and Leia's great grandson? Sure, set it 1,000 years in the future. Whatever it is, this universe, this creation begs to be explored by people. And that's really another one of its hallmarks. My kids were sitting around and they're like, oh, well, there's only episode 8 and 9 and then we're done. And I'm like, whoa, we will never be done. We will never give up on this universe and the stories it can tell. I believe that. I think Star Wars is going to stick around, and there'll always be people willing to tell or retell the stories that are set in that creative space, which is exciting, which is just one of those things that links us all. I can go anywhere in the world and I could be wearing a Star Wars t-shirt in anywhere in the world, cite somebody, and I can instantly have a connection. And that's amazing to me. It's really one of the hallmarks of great commonalities that we can share. And I might not have anything else in common with that person, but if I can sit down and geek out about Star Wars, that's a place to start. And that's
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Absolutely. And I don't consider myself a mega fan. I'm not a mega geek. I can sit down and I can have a legitimate conversation with most anyone. And if they have a whole lot more knowledge, guess what? Now I get to listen, I get to learn. And you're absolutely right. You know, it's going to be Disney who decides when they cut it off. And let's be honest, money talks. Whether however creative we want to be and however we want to immerse ourselves in the culture, money talks. And as long as these large franchises are still relevant and they can still be done properly and correctly, and they're going to continue to just build on it. And you had shown a book that you're reading, and as long as they continue to make these kind of content, exactly, then I haven't seen that one yet. I haven't read it.
No, yeah. So Ahsoka is my fanboy crush. I love that character. I fell in love with her instantly during the Clone Wars run. I was so heavily invested in Ahsoka. I sit down and I ask LucasArts every night before I go to bed, please put her in a live action movie for me. Like, get her there. She was fantastic in Rebels when she came back. Mm-hmm. You would have seen her in Rebels there. Mm-hmm. She had a very epic fight with Vader at one of the temples. No spoilers. Go watch it. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
This book fills in the gap between the Clone Wars animated series and when she shows back up. Is with that time frame.
Oh, nice.
And it shows how she switches out lightsabers. It deals a little bit with Order 66 and why she survived and what that means to her as a character, which is a really big deal if you remember how she left how they wrote her out of the Clone Wars. So her not being in episodes 2 and 3 made sense, right? We fell in love with this girl that showed up in the Clone Wars, which takes place between episodes 2 and 3. Why wasn't she in episode 3? Well, she hadn't been created yet because Clone Wars came afterwards. Yep. As far as the creative timeline goes, you know, here's this wonderful character that people are all over. They're buying her merchandise. They're writing fan fiction about her. They're so heavily in Ahsoka Tano. They want to know what happened to her. They want to see her on the big screen. And they want her in the video games. And she did. She appeared in most of it. And her last step into, you know, really being one of those iconic characters is getting on the big screen. And I'm hoping. I think she deserves to be there. She's a wonderful character. And that goes back to that storytelling. Snips is a unique character. Mm-hmm. She is not just, it's episode 7. We need 3 heroes to run around as a trio. Okay. One of them should probably be this roguing, dashing pilot guy. Great. Poe. We can check off the Han box. Even though Han's here, we're going to check off the Han box. Okay, now we need an awkward hero who's really weird around girls. Okay, check off the Finn box and weak box. Now we need a girl because girl power sells. Rey, Leia, right? The correlations there are, to me, lazy storytelling. And what's our big bad? A giant Death Star. Are you freaking kidding me? Come on, I want to watch another Death Star blow up. Really glad the Death Star blew up. I'm hoping, looking forward, that I never see another Death Star again. It's overplayed. The shtick is done. I am no longer concerned about giant constructed planet killer bases in whatever form that the Empire is taking. Like, please, I'm really looking forward. No spoilers. Looking forward. I want to see a villain be a character that develops, a character that has a story arc, a character that I can empathize with as I'm cheering his getting curb stomped, right? Like, I want to know, I want a decent villain. I don't want a prop in the sky that explodes. I want a decent villain.
Okay, so two things. One, and I don't know what, I do know why, but out of all of the Star Wars books, and I haven't read them all, I'm not even close to read them all, but the series, the 2 series, and like I said, and they go one into the other, is the Thrawn and the Xandi. And Thrawn, to me, is an amazing villain. And they brought him into Rebels. And when they brought him into Rebels, I was like, yeah, now we got something going. Because Thrawn it's just the character development of Thrawn and everything that they went into in that what was there, 9 books in that series or some crazy thing like that. Amazing. And I honestly feel that if they did a live action movie, I honestly think that the Xandi and the Thrawn and all that piece of it should be there. But with that said, moving forward is, we have these, the Rogue One and the origin stories, right? And I love that Disney's doing this. I love that they're alternating. Every year we have Star Wars, which marketing wise, freaking genius. Merchandising, genius. Money making, genius. We're just going to pump one out every year for the next 6 years, right? And as fans, right, we're like, right? We're jacked as long as it's done well. Rogue One, super happy with that. I thought they did an amazing job with it. Our next origin story. So let me ask you, if you could pick something or someone to have the origin story, what would you pick?
Okay. I think there's 3 really good areas that their current fan base is really invested in time-wise that are ripe to be told stories in. There is the gap where it's the reign of Vader, right? Like, we all want to see Vader be evil. We got a little taste of that in some of the video games we've seen come and go. The Force Unleashed for the PlayStation, he's got his own apprentice. He's got some Garen Malik who almost showed up in Rebels but didn't. So I want to see Vader. I want to see the reign of Vader. I want to see how he interacted with Darth Sidious when it was the height of the Empire and the Rebels were just getting going. There's a huge block of time there. And then you jump forward to the next generational gap in the main storyline. What was it like after Sidious fell down the well, right? And Vader died. Again, now we have no Sith presence.
The power vacuum.
Why wasn't it all just hunky-dory? Like, who was Snoke and how did he get into manipulating Ben or Kylo, whichever, that character? There's that huge timeline there, 25 years that we don't know anything about.
Right.
So I would prefer to see timelines explored before I get origin story, because I think Rogue One was better done than Episode 7, because it took a look at characters we didn't know. It went out of its way to make sure Rogue One could stand on its own as a story, where I feel Episode 7 sort of grabbed the coattails and said, okay, we're doing all the Star Wars stuff that everybody loves, and that'll sell the movie. Right down to Mos Eisley Cantina version 2.0. Right. Maz is an amazing character. I love Maz as a character.
Yep.
I did not like how they introduced her. I did not like that we had to go through watching a different Mos Eisley Cantina band play a different song. I'm like, come on, guys. Everybody knows what you're doing here. Yeah. You're going to Mos Eisley 2.0. It's lazy. Like, I have no tolerance for the laziness introduced in 7. Death Star version 3, it's just bigger and badder. It was a cool idea that it actually drained off a sun, but they were blowing up galaxy systems light years away from themselves. I'm like, my suspension of disbelief is a little shaken in this just a purely sci-fi storytelling way. And yeah, but Rogue One didn't do any of that. They're like, look, we're going to take a look at this very cool event that everybody knows happened, and we're going to tell it in just a mind-blowing way. And I think 9 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10, people were happier with Rogue One than they were with Episode 7.
Yes, I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. Sorry about all that. I needed to plug in my computer. So here's the thing. If I could do an origin story, I wouldn't do it on a person. I wouldn't. I don't want an origin story on a person. I want an origin story on the Millennium Falcon. I want to see how it went from a freighter that was designed to do a specific thing and how it progressively became what it was when we saw it in Episode 4. That's what I want to see. I want to see who owned it. I want to see how many times it had been stolen and repossessed. And, and is that a movie? I don't know. Maybe it's a series, but for whatever reason, that's what I want to see. Is I want to see what it took to take the Millennium Falcon from when it was sold as a YT-1300 as a freighter that was its whole life was going to be going from this point to this point and back and forth again, and nothing was going to happen, to being one of the most iconic spaceships in all of sci-fi history.
Yeah. That's a really cool idea, and it's a challenge for creators. Could somebody sit down and the one that jumps to mind is the Matrix Reloaded animated shorts. There were 7 animated shorts that told different stories set in the Matrix. They got 7 different directors, 7 different art styles, but they all dealt with the Matrix. I want to see that, where it's 7 different collaborators, 7 different ideas, all telling a chunk of the Millennium Falcon story. You know what?
Cool.
Was it the Hutts that went and souped up this freighter so they had the best smuggling ship in the world? Or was it a legitimate thing that went terribly wrong and got stolen, where somebody was doing experiments with hyperdrives and whatever else makes the Millennium Falcon the Millennium Falcon? I think that there is, I think it is. I think you could do something with it.
How did Lando end up with it? Lando lost it to Han in a card game of Sabacc. Okay, so how did Lando get it? Well, we all know Lando's backstory, and that he was a rogue, and he was a swindler and everything else. So who did he do a bad deal with to get it? And how did they reinforce the exoskeleton of this so that it's like 10 times stronger than any other spaceship, but it looks exactly the same? So yes, you're absolutely right, and I like that. That's a cool idea of having like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 different styles and tell that story. And it would be a great miniseries. It really would, because think of the other characters that could be developed through that process. Because the Millennium Falcon by that time was, I don't know, it was like 80 years old, 100 years old or something like that. It was an old spacecraft by the time Han got a hold of it. So anyway.
And it really, like, you only have to think a little bit. You only have to really sit down, and it is so ready. Was it the Force? What did the Force, as a semi self-aware, if you think about the Force as having the ability to motivate people in their actions, did the Force have anything to do with the development of the Millennium Falcon as the long-term plan played out? Is that something you could actually look at? Was it a Force-sensitive person that had a vision in the middle of the night on how to adjust the engines to run the 12 parsec Kessel Run? And if it is, that changes a lot of how we look at the Force's relationship to its universe. I don't know, but I'd really love to find out.
Or was it just dumb shit luck?
Yeah.
So that's once they started coming out and they were saying, we're probably going to be doing, and I call it origin stories. I don't know if that's the right term, but started doing origin stories. I'm like, we know we're going to have Yoda. We know that for a fact. That it's a good chance we might end up with Han Solo. There's a good chance we might end up with the Wookiee. There's a good chance, there's so many iconic characters that could easily be made into a full origin story. Where did they, how old is Chewbacca? Truly and honestly,
right.
But the whole time I'm just like, no, I want to know about the Millennium Falcon.
And I think, again, you run into this problem of, if you only focus on the established characters, you're missing an opportunity to expand your universe in a way that talks to more people.
Yes.
And that's the juggling act, is keeping the current fan base happy, the people who are going to pay the money to see the film, or do we take a risk and try to engage a new audience at a risk reward type, ratio? And I think it's always better to chase a new idea than it is to ride along on the status quo. So that's my kind of closing thought is I want to see Star Wars continue to push itself in directions to where the universe and the story with more people.
Okay, so we need to wrap this up here in about an hour and a half because we can keep going that long. So there's more and more now that we have access as regular Joe Blows, we have access to this. I mean, dude, right? 10 years ago, there was no chance in hell we could have done what we're doing right now, right? So we have access to media, technology, equipment like we've never had it before, ever. And it's dirt cheap with high quality stuff, right? So we all know Disney and Lucasfilms hold on to their stuff like it's their last breath. Their franchising opportunities are ridiculously hard to get into. Once you get in, you're good, and you're going to make $1,000,000,000. So my question is, and I probably already know the answer, but the question is with YouTube the way it is right now, with Facebook Live the way it is right now, is there an opportunity for us to do fan base stuff and get the blessing from Lucas and Disney to do stuff like maybe Millennium Falcon is a great opportunity to put it out to the market and say, we're going to have a contest and you guys are going to create the next 10 episodes of this new XYZ. Do you think Disney and Lucas would ever even consider that?
I don't know. That's an interesting, big picture question. There are ideas already moving in that direction. Okay. Dark Horse Comics does a talent search. I mean, they're arguably number 3 in the comic book world. You've got Marvel, you've got DC, and then there's Dark Horse. Dark Horse ran a run on the Star Wars comics, and they do a talent search. So just an open call. You sit down, you write, you draw, you ship it off to Oregon, and you get a letter back from Dark Horse saying, hey, come work with us. It's an interesting in where you don't have to jump through all the hoops you traditionally have to jump through to become a creator. So I think the idea is there that we do want to push into user-created content, right? Where we are consumers, but now we can't let go of these great ideas, and it's slower coming than I would like. I really thought user-created content would have exploded and taken over the market, and it certainly has found its niche, but it's not mainstream yet. And I don't know. I don't know what the turning point is going to be. If it's going to be a platform that gets so large that the established corporations like Disney can't ignore it anymore, and they have to start taking it into consideration, and they can't shut it down by legal means and copyright infringement, because that's the sticky part, right? You and I can make the best Star Wars story ever, but legally we can't make a dime off of it. How do I sink an investment of my time and energy and money into a project that I know will never have returns because of the legal definitions that are held by another person? So what is it going to take for the establishment to embrace user-created content like that? And I don't know. It's coming, but I don't know how it will ever get legitimized into the mainstream. YouTube is certainly an inroad, right? And the licensing gets wonky there because you simply say, oh, we're making a fan-based film, and bam, you've done it, and it's on YouTube, and everybody enjoys it. But you're making revenue from YouTube, but it's not against LucasArts' abilities in the realm of marketing. I don't understand it. I'm not that smart, but I hope it gets there. As of now, I think you're still pudgy and then going to a board meeting at LucasArts and saying, hey, I've got this really great idea. Would you like to buy it? And then they decide yes or no in a very traditional manner. And the odds are probably no, unfortunately.
Well, and I think in our lifetime we're going to see a significant shift in that. I really do, because all of these free platforms, now that YouTube, you mentioned YouTube, now that YouTube has a monthly subscription, now they're changing their deal. Netflix is changing how they do theirs. I anticipate in the next 4 or 5 years, maybe a little longer, that we're going to see a lot less non-Netflix produced material. They have like a $2 billion a year now production budget that they're producing all of their own stuff.
I'm really happy with Netflix's production value. I think they're doing a stellar job.
They're doing a killer job. Amazon, some of their stuff, not all of it, some of their stuff is killer, So we're seeing a pushback, and I'm talking about the movie industry just for a minute, and then we got to cut this off. But the movie industry has made a huge change lately, and it's all about blockbusters. We're seeing very, very little non-blockbuster material making it to the big theaters, because that's where all the money is now. With Netflix, now with Hulu, now with all of these different streaming opportunities, the revenues aren't there as much. And I've been following it a little bit lately, and unless the movie's going to make a gajillion $1,000s, it's going straight to Netflix. It's going straight to Amazon, because that's where the consistent money is. That's where the long money is, not the short money. And so as the Netflix, the Amazons, the YouTubes, all of these other production houses start upping their game and diversifying, I think it's going to open up another opportunity for even smaller people to get in and create a new niche. I truly believe that, and I might be off my rocker, but that's what I believe. So with that said, let's wrap this up. We're now a freaking hour into this, man. Time flies. This is awesome. Thank you so much, John. Here's what I want to tell all of you guys is this is going to be an ongoing conversation. John and I can't get enough of this crap. We're actually going to be expanding this. We're going to be doing it a lot different, and we may be creating our own thing when it comes to talking about movies. So I'm not gonna drop that bomb right now, because we still need to work out some stuff. But what I do want you to do is tell us what movie you want us to talk about next. Give us some ideas. Give us some stuff. And if I haven't watched the movie, I'll go watch it and we'll talk about it. But there's so much to talk about. I'd love to talk about the Marvel universe. I'd love to talk about all these things. So let's do that, John. Brother, thanks for taking some time out for me. This has been
thank you, Dale.
An absolute blast.
You bet. Yeah, and please don't. Dale's a movie guy. I'm sort of a movie guy. I love creative properties. I don't care what it is. I just want to latch onto it, and I want to see it do well. I love video games. I love comic books. I love movies. I want to see all of these interactive medias do very well and tell their stories, because that's what I am. I'm a storyteller. So don't, if I'm on board, if I'm here, please do not hesitate to ask about any creative property. I'll latch on to, I'll sink my teeth right into whatever discussion it wants to be. So don't limit it to just movies. We can expand Dale's horizons here. We can get him thinking outside just the big silver screen. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun moving forward. And thank you for sitting down and having a really awesome hour to start off the day.
Man, I appreciate you, brother. Guys, thanks for hanging out with us here on our investigation into kickassery, because this whole conversation kicked ass. This was awesome, man. This is awesome. Thanks, brother. We're going to call it an end. You guys jump over on to John's page. Also, what's your comic book page?
2 Points Comics, and that's I'm settling down into a routine with the 2 jobs and the new baby, and I really am trying to focus on getting back into content. I've been sharing a lot of different things up onto 2 Points Comics, and so now creator content is going to come back to that Facebook page as well. So hit me up in the comments. I'll get a link in there as soon as I can, but head on over, check out the stuff that's already there, and we'll throw something Star Wars related up today on the page.
All right, John, I appreciate your time. Love you, brother. I'll talk to you soon, man. Everybody,
you bet, brother. Talk to you later.
Keep smiling, because somebody needs it.
Yeah, you too.